Okay, so we've seen how we can pass values into a function. Now we're going to talk about how functions can return values. And we've seen this before. If I hit, oh no, F12 doesn't work on here. But if I go F12 here, you guys have seen the prompt function before, right? What is your name? If I could type your name. And it does this, and I type in Mr. V, okay, and it returns, you can actually see in the console, it returns Mr. V. So normally what we do with that is we'd store it in a variable, right? Prompt, what is your name? Like so, I type in Mr. V. Now it shows undefined, but the value that this function returned got stored inside of this variable, and I can test that by going username stores Mr. V. Right, so this is a function, and it's returning a value. And we can use that return value. Actually, I have in the notes here. You can store, so random decimal is a function we can do here. Because math.random is nice, but if you want anything that's not between 0 and 1, you got to do all these calculations. So it's nice to have a function called random decimal that takes in a low and a high value. And it'll go high minus low to get the range, times it by math.random, and then add low to make sure the number is within low to high. And it'll return that value. So when I call the function and it returns, I can store the return value in a variable, or I can call it again here and pass the return value into another function, so it'll log it to the console, or I can even call the function inside of an expression, right, of a mathematical expression here. This will return a value, and then I'll square it to the times by pi. Okay, so this function is return values, and you can use those return values in many different ways. Let's see that in action. Maybe I'll just open up my little sandbox here and just play around with this. Main.js, get rid of the display greeting one, function random decimal takes in a low and a high, and I simply go return math.random times high minus low plus low. And this is how we do it, the return keyword, and it'll return whatever expression follows the return keyword. So it'll do this calculation and get a result, and then the function will return that. Okay. Should take note that the return function automatically ends, or the return keyword automatically ends the function. In this case, it's only a one-line function anyway, although I should have my comments. What did I have in the notes there again? Return a randomness between low and high. Okay. Return a random decimal between low and high. Low is inclusive and high is exclusive. Right? That's the way math.random works. 0 is inclusive, 1 is exclusive. Okay. And then to call this, I can just go, let random num be assigned random decimal between 20 and 30. Console.log random num. All right, let's run this. Okay, open my console, and there it is. Hit refresh, and I get a different random decimal between 20 and 30 each time. Okay. Again, I didn't need to, here I stored in a variable. I could have gotten rid of that and just put the function call right inside of the console.log. So it'll evaluate, it'll call this function and pass in the arguments. Let's go 50 to 100 this time. It'll return from this function, and it'll return a value, and then we log that to the console. Let's try that again. Refresh, refresh, like so. And actually what I might do, let's copy and paste all of this. Let's use that wonderful visualize JavaScript tutor again. Plug the code into there. And again, it shows as a random decimal function, great. And now this console.log, first it calls the random decimal function with low and high of 50 and 100. It'll do this calculation and return it, so it shows us that there's the return value. And when the function returns, it'll go inside of the console.log. So now it'll execute the console.log with the value that it returned. Cool. Okay, that's the basics of return values. And like I said, comes in really handy when you want a function to do something and produce a result that you can then return to store somewhere. Now, a little note I had here was that you can also return multiple values. Sometimes you might want to do a bunch of calculations. You could use an object, right? Return, do the curly brace there to represent an object literal. And you could return an X property, which is this, comma, a Y property, which is this, and you could list more if you really wanted to. But this will return an X and a Y to get a random point. Okay, so like I said, functions, think of these functions as blocks of code, and you can pass values into the function through parameters and arguments, and the function can return a value as well. Okay, that's it for this introduction to the notes here. In the next one, we'll do a couple more examples of some math functions that will come in handy. Okay, and then you'll have a chance to define some functions of your own in an assignment. All right, so that's return values. Hope that made sense. Take care and see you in the next video.